Ladies and gentlemen, I am Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is September 13th, 2022. This is your daily Ukraine update, and we're going to ask ourselves, do the Russians even have any fight left? Let's get into it. So, first off, as you guys can see, the situation like we talked about is that the Russians have completely withdrawn from any part of Ukraine, at least north of like Lysychansk and east of this river and reservoir, right? So this is a massive amount of territory that Russia has yielded. It pales in comparison to the really devastating Ukraine defeat near Lysychansk, right, where they were encircled and had to withdraw, yielding, of course, the entire city of Lysychansk and surrounding villages, right? That was seen as a pretty operational defeat. So it's tough to place into context just how bad this level of loss is. This is a real, what we would consider a strategic defeat. The best way to think of these things is when I say strategic usually means directly impacting the end state of the war itself. Operational usually means essential to achieving objectives, incidental to making a strategic gain. So for example, seizing Izium would have been considered a operational gain, right? Because seizing it was instrumental in pushing the Russians out of the Kharkiv region. Right. Then we have tactical, and tactical is usually focused on smaller units doing individual maneuvers in order to achieve an objective. So for example, if in seizing Izium, a commander decided to, run a feint operation, that would be considered a tactic. Or they did a late night river crossing, that would be considered a tactical decision. Again, just the further we zoom out, the more it goes from tactical to operational to strategic, right? And this is what we would consider a strategic loss. Really has to fundamentally change the way Russia is approaching this war. Now, we are going to also... Russia has a little bit of a problem. As you can see, they have wisely decided to use this natural obstacle, this river here, as sort of their defensive barrier, right? In order to give them time to establish a new defensive line and dig in and be able to hold off this Ukrainian advance. And as you can see, they've sort of succeeded, right? It takes time to cross a river, even a small one. You need pontoon boats, you need a bridge. And if the Russians have blown these bridges, then the Ukrainians sort of by definition are going to have to stop, right? Now, the issue is you can see just down here by Sviatohorsk. And you can see that here, Ukrainian forces were actually able to perhaps get across a bridge that hasn't yet been destroyed. You might notice that we have right here Bohododichne, and this was actually already a weak point in the lines. If you recall from months and months ago, Bohododichne was a major site of combat. This bridge was heavily contested by, I believe it was a Ukrainian air assault brigade. And the Russians actually attempted to cross this bridgehead, seize Bohododichne. They were stopped. It became a back and forth battle that went on for weeks, and eventually Ukrainian forces were able to push the Russians behind this forest area here. This is actually a preserve, a natural like woodland. And once they did so, it meant that Ukrainian forces were able to more or less preserve this bridge and this area. Now, they weren't able to cross it and seize any more Russian territory, but you can see that operational victory, right, keeping the Russians out of Bohododichne might have proven to be a tactical victory, but also have strategic implications, because you can see this is now the only foothold that Ukrainian forces have east of the river. So now it's their best chance to push Russian lines back. Russia's going to have to figure out what to do about this hole in their lines. Now, it's going to be a little easier because their lines aren't collapsing, right? You notice this is an attack from a direction that the Russians sort of expect it, right? So their defensive line is prepared to resist troops, to resist an attack coming from in front of it. Think about trench warfare, right? In the trenches, you look out, World War I style, you know the enemy is there, and your entire defensive operation is focused in front of you. You know, the Allies don't expect the Germans to come from the left. They don't expect the Germans to come from behind them. They're not prepared for either of those two. So in this case, this may be a harder fight simply because Russian defensive lines are oriented entirely in this direction. You know, unlike, again, a lot of this combat where there was the initial breakthrough to Kupiansk, but then the rest of the fighting were Russians just being attacked by Ukrainians from unexpected directions. So this is the real question here. I believe this and probably Ozerne. The other thing you have to remember is there's a phase called consolidation, and consolidation is a military term for when you'd have exactly something like this happen. Where you need to take time to make sure that your gains are secure, that the area you've gotten control of is actually secured, right? So you know, Ukraine needs defensive lines because there are Russians right over the border. So they need good defensive positions all along this new border that they've secured. And they have to make sure that within this area, there aren't Russian partisans, entire Russian units that have simply laid low. That the Russians haven't left booby traps, mines, even potentially special forces that can do observations or behind the line sabotage, right? So they have to take the time to secure these gains, or else they risk having, again, partisans in their backfield, Russians harassing them across the border, right? So, and this is a lot of territory for even a fairly well-manned assault to seize. So Ukraine may need to take some time and consolidate these gains before they get ready to push hard into an area of Russian lines that has already considerable defensive operations. Now, that being said, the reports of panic in the Russian lines are significant. You know, these are not Russian professional troops at this point. I think it's fair to say they are almost all DNR, LNR conscripts or Russians who have been voluntold to go to war in some capacity, or Russians who are just too stupid to realize. So this panic may spread sort of like a run on a bank, right? A run on a bank isn't because the bank is fundamentally unsound. It's because customers believe that the bank doesn't have their money anymore. And so they all, in a panic, go to the bank trying to get their money back, creating the situation that they were panicked about. Similarly, Russia may have a solid defensive line here that is perfectly capable of holding, but the panic of having a Ukrainian attack that's just shellacked literally an entire operational sector may be so panic-inducing that when even a probing Ukrainian attack comes, the Russians may actually flee in response. Again, this is something that high morale and professional troops are less likely to have these problems, though. Again, troops of any level of training will panic under enough pressure. All this to say, it's tough to know what will happen next, but I really suspect that you may see Ukrainian forces engage in some consolidation at this point, right? There's also some talk, of course, that there's continued advances in the Kherson front, obviously not nearly to the scale of what we've seen in Kharkiv, but nonetheless, it is progressing, and Russia has only bad choices, right? It's lost a lot of equipment and a lot of troops in this sector near Kharkiv, which means it doesn't have that many places it can pull from. It can abandon some of its offensives in Donetsk, where it's trying to seize territory. It can pull troops out of Kherson, but that are currently holding that territory against a considerable Ukrainian attack. And so it has only bad choices, right? Or it can raise more troops, but supposedly, Russia's newly formed volunteer units, the spirit of volunteerism seems to have left them. So much so that Russian military command is suspending sending new, already formed units to Ukraine due to the widespread distrust of the Russian military command that have caused a large number of volunteers to categorically refuse to participate in combat. Honestly, this is probably just good sense for these volunteers. Now, I understand Russia doesn't really have any combat troops left, but so it can't really have non-combat volunteers. But a better method is to actually have if they still had frontline combat troops, like their professional troops, to have them function as the primary fighting force, since they are the best trained, and then rely on volunteers for non-combat or combat adjacent roles. For example, driving supply trucks to and from the front, or doing maintenance on vehicles, other jobs that are potentially combat adjacent, but do not require the high skilled command and control individual soldier skills that really is the realm of professional soldiery. Let's see. It talks about the fact that Kremlin has a really poor ability to generate combat capabilities. This is what in the US we call force generation. And it's the idea that you can you have a continual spigot to pour into combat, into your theaters of war. And again, Russia's struggles have been really, really well known. What Russia is extremely reluctant to do, because they actually think that it may actually drive Putin out of power, or the level of unrest would be uncontrollable, would be a general conscription. This would be just drafting 18 to 24-year-old men into the war. But even if they did that, it's not clear that they would be able to get equipment. It's not clear that Russia even has the equipment, rifles, uniforms, etc. for a general conscription. So all in all, Russia has only bad choices ahead of itself. It's going to have to slow its operations even further if it wants to stabilize the incredible risk that it's assumed for itself. Anyway, guys, that is all I had for you. As always, thank you so much. And of course, if you want the uncensored combat videos that YouTube won't let me show, I do the breakdowns all on the Patreon. Thanks to my Lieutenant tier patrons. You guys make this whole thing possible, and I will catch you guys in the next one.